Well, I selected the cartilages of the heads of these fishes, and you can scarcely imagine the delight with which I welcomed the arrival of each Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, as affording me the means of increasing my stock of pens, for I will freely confess that my historical labors have been my greatest solace and relief. While retracing the past, I forget the present, and traversing at will the path of history I cease to remember that I am myself a prisoner. But the ink, said Dantes, of what did you make your ink? There was formerly a fireplace in my dungeon, replied Faria, but it was closed up long ere I became an occupant of this prison. Still, it must have been many years in use, for it was thickly covered with a coating of soot. This soot I dissolved in a portion of the wine brought to me every Sunday, and I assure you a better ink cannot be desired. For very important notes, for which closer attention is required, I pricked one of my fingers, and wrote with my own blood. And when, asked Dantes, may I see all this? Whenever you please, replied the Abbé. Oh, then let it be directly, exclaimed the young man. Follow me, then, said the Abbé, as he re-entered the subterranean passage, in which he soon disappeared, followed by Dantes. Chapter 17. The Abbé's Chamber. After having passed with tolerable ease through the subterranean passage, which, however, did not admit of their holding themselves erect, the two friends reached the further end of the corridor, into which the Abbé's cell opened. From that point the passage became much narrower, and barely permitted one to creep through on hands and knees. The floor of the Abbé's cell was paved, and it had been by raising one of the stones in the most obscure corner that Faria had been able to commence the laborious task of which Dantes had witnessed the completion. As he entered the chamber of his friend, Dantes cast around one eager and searching glance in quest of the expected marvels, but nothing more than common met his view. It is well, said the Abbé, we have some hours before us, it is now just 12:15 o'clock. Instinctively Dantes turned round to observe by what watch or clock the Abbé had been able so accurately to specify the hour. Look at this ray of light which enters by my window, said the Abbé, and then observe the lines traced on the wall. Well, by means of these lines, which are in accordance with the double motion of the earth, and the ellipse it describes round the sun, I am enabled to ascertain the precise hour with more minuteness than if I possessed a watch, for that might be broken or deranged in its movements, while the sun and earth never vary in their appointed paths. This last explanation was wholly lost upon Dantes, who had always imagined, from seeing the sun rise from behind the mountains and set in the Mediterranean, that it moved, and not the earth. A double movement of the globe he inhabited, and of which he could feel nothing, appeared to him perfectly impossible. Each word that fell from his companion's lips seemed fraught with the mysteries of science, as worthy of digging out as the gold and diamonds in the mines of Gujarat and Golconda, which he could just recollect having visited during a voyage made in his earliest youth. Come, said he to the Abbé, I am anxious to see your treasures. The Abbé smiled, and, proceeding to the disused fireplace, raised, by the help of his chisel, a long stone, which had doubtless been the hearth, beneath which was a cavity of considerable depth, serving as a safe depository of the articles mentioned to Dantes. What do you wish to see first? Asked the Abbé. Oh, your great work on the monarchy of Italy. Faria then drew forth from his hiding place 3 or 4 rolls of linen, laid one over the other, like folds of papyrus. These rolls consisted of slips of cloth about 4 inches wide and 18 long. They were all carefully numbered and closely covered with writing, so legible that Dantes could easily read it, as well as make out the sense, it being in Italian, a language he, as a Provençal, perfectly understood. There, said he, there is the work complete. I wrote the word finis at the end of the 68th strip about a week ago. I have torn up 2 of my shirts, and as many handkerchiefs as I was master of, to complete the precious pages. Should I ever get out of prison and find in all Italy a printer courageous enough to publish what I have composed, my literary reputation is forever secured. I see, answered Dantes. Now let me behold the curious pens with which you have written your work. Look, said Faria, showing to the young man a slender stick about 6 inches long, and much resembling the size of the handle of a fine painting brush, to the end of which was tied, by a piece of thread, one of those cartilages of which the Abbé had before spoken to Dantes. It was pointed, and divided at the nib like an ordinary pen. Dantes examined it with intense admiration, then looked around to see the instrument with which it had been shaped so correctly into form. "Ah, yes," said Faria, "the penknife. That's my masterpiece. I made it, as well as this larger knife, out of an old iron candlestick." The penknife was sharp and keen as a razor. As for the other knife, it would serve a double purpose, and with it one could cut and thrust. Dantes examined the various articles shown to him with the same attention that he had bestowed on the curiosities and strange tools exhibited in the shops at Marseille as the works of the savages in the South Seas from whence they had been brought by the different trading vessels. "As for the ink," said Faria, "I told you how I managed to obtain that, and I only just make it from time to time, as I require it." "One thing still puzzles me," observed Dantes, "and that is how you managed to do all this by daylight?" "I worked at night also," replied Faria. "Night? Why, for heaven's sake, are your eyes like cats, that you can see to work in the dark?" "Indeed they are not, but God has supplied man with the intelligence that enables him to overcome the limitations of natural conditions. I furnished myself with a light." "You did? Pray tell me how." "I separated the fat from the meat served to me, melted it, and so made oil. Here is my lamp." So saying, the Abbé exhibited a sort of torch very similar to those used in public illuminations. "But light? Here are 2 flints and a piece of burnt linen." "And matches?" "I pretended that I had a disorder of the skin, and asked for a little sulphur, which was readily supplied." Dantes laid the different things he had been looking at on the table, and stood with his head drooping on his breast, as though overwhelmed by the perseverance and strength of Faria's mind. "You have not seen all yet," continued Faria, "for I did not think it wise to trust all my treasures in the same hiding place. Let us shut this one up." They put the stone back in its place, The abbé sprinkled a little dust over it to conceal the traces of its having been removed, rubbed his foot well on it to make it assume the same appearance as the other, and then, going towards his bed, he removed it from the spot it stood in. Behind the head of the bed, and concealed by a stone fitting in so closely as to defy all suspicion, was a hollow space, and in this space a ladder of cords between 25 and 30 feet in length. Dantes closely and eagerly examined it. He found it firm, solid, and compact enough to bear any weight. Who supplied you with the materials for making this wonderful work? I tore up several of my shirts, and ripped out the seams in the sheets of my bed, during my 3 years' imprisonment at Fenestrelle, and when I was removed to the Chateau d'If, I managed to bring the ravelings with me, so that I have been able to finish my work here. And was it not discovered that your sheets were unhemmed? Oh, no, for when I had taken out the thread I required, I hemmed the edges over again. With what? With this needle, said the abbé, as, opening his ragged vestments, he showed Dantes a long, sharp fishbone, with a small perforated eye for the thread, a small portion of which still remained in it.